Before I start this fanfic reading, please keep in mind of the continuity of this fanfic. This fanfic takes place before the Perfect Pear episode aired, and before Big Mac found his special somepony. So please keep those two in mind for this fanfic reading. Anyway, without any further ado, I hope you guys enjoy the fanfic reading, and let's get to it. An Apple Family Heartwarming, written by Silverstar7. Aw, Granny, you know you didn't have to.
I won't hear it, Applejack. You could be 15 years older and you'd still be a little filly in my eyes. Now, open it up.
Applejack smiled and pulled the wrapping off of her present. She, of course, enjoyed receiving gifts from her family, but she also worried about how money was usually running tight during the off-season. She knew they always were fine come spring, but still, it was in her nature to be a bit worried. Inside the package was a red kerchief with golden patterns woven into it. Her other good one had gotten torn up at her last rodeo, and she hadn't found time to get a new one. Wow, it's beautiful, Granny. Thank you.
No problem at all.
Applebloom was already wearing her new bright green bow and couldn't wait to show it off to Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo the next day.
You did a really great job on the gifts this year, Granny.
Yup, exclaimed Big Macintosh, who was still admiring his new horse collar. He had outgrown his previous one a while ago and had simply been putting up with a tight fit. This one also featured a much nicer design etched into the sides. The stallion didn't particularly care for showing off, but it would certainly look nice.
Well, Heartwarming ain't over yet. I got one more present for each of you.
She pulled over a small box that she had sitting on her table.
Oh, what is it?
Applebloom bounded towards her grandmother eagerly. Applejack and Big Mac slowly trotted over.
I'm afraid it's nothing quite so exciting, youngin'.
Granny reached into the box and pulled out 3 envelopes. Each one was addressed in their father's hoofwriting. It was a hoofwriting that Applejack could still recognize to this day.
Your father wrote each of you a letter when you were born. He wanted you to have it when you were older.
The 3 gaped at their unexpected gifts. Applebloom didn't know what to think. She'd always been uncomfortable talking about her parents during the holidays, but of course, that was when every pony brought it up. She always winced when Miss Cheerily would tell her to have a good heartwarming with your family. The pause was slight, but Applebloom noticed it. Granny Smith, what brought this on?
I figure since we all decided Applebloom was old enough to stay home on her own, that all of you young whippersnappers were old enough to have your letters.
She distributed them and sat back into her chair.
Now, I haven't read these. They could be anything, and I imagined he had something to tell you about them when he gave it to you. But I want you to have them now.
The 3 stared, each at their own letter. Big Mac didn't remember his father ever telling him about a letter from when he was born. He supposed there was no reason to mention it. After all, while he was the oldest child, he still felt like he was quite young when his parents had passed away. The loss of his father had been particularly hard because the 2 were so close. To be so far away from him for so long was still heartbreaking to this day. With a sigh, Big Mac opened his letter and read it to himself.
Dear Big Macintosh, I'm so amazed by you, son. You were the biggest foal any of the nurse ponies had ever seen. Strong and healthy, with a coat the color of your namesake apple, and a mane so full you looked like you were months old already. What amazed me most, though, is that you never cried. At first, the doctors were all afraid that something was wrong. Your mother and I were too. But you were breathing, and before we knew it, you opened up those big eyes and looked around, stretching, kicking, very much alive. Your mom says I shouldn't jump to conclusions. You're years away from getting your cutie mark. But it's easy to imagine that you're going to be the best apple farmer Sweet Apple Acres has ever known. You certainly have your grandfather's mane color, and I bet you have his heart and determination too. And do know that I'll love you just as much no matter what you end up doing. Just don't expect me to understand what you do at your job if you end up with one of those fancy mathematics degrees. It might be easy for me to write these things, but it's hard for me to picture them. I know someday you'll be a strong stallion, but today you're my son. As I write this, you're asleep in the crib and I can hold you in my hoofs. And you'll be ready to go off and face the world. But I don't know if I'll ever be ready for you to leave home. Father and son, the two go together and nothing can separate that bond. Now, son, there is one more thing I want to say. I'm gonna be straight with you on this. Don't go chasing after every filly that catches your fancy. Look for a mare that likes you for you. Some pony nice and hard-working who will be a good mother for your foals and support you in everything you do. And don't be afraid to look for some pony nearby. Your mom and I were friends for a few years before we started dating. Sometimes the right one is the one right next to you. As of right now, all those problems are years away. But I know that if I blink, you'll be all grown up. And you will go off into the world. And you will have a place of your own. And you will have a family of your own. And I'll be proud of everything you do. And even after all that time, we'll still be father and son.
In a quiet, low voice, Big Macintosh gave a yup as he set down his father's letter. He only choked slightly on the word. He knew the whole letter was true, that even the great gap of death could not separate their bond as father and son, and that somewhere his father was proud of him, proud of the stallion he had become, proud of the way he had looked after their farm, and proud of the brother he had been to his sisters. Applejack had never expected to get anything like this on Hearthwarming Eve. Some new saddlebags, perhaps. A nicer pair of galoshes, maybe. Never this. Never something from her father. Her father hadn't given her a gift in years, and yet here one sat before her, and it felt more precious than all the jewels in Canterlot. She opened her letter with a trembling huff and read,
Dear Applejack, I'll be honest with you. I was worried and afraid of so many things when you were born. Of course, I had all the usual fears about the delivery. Would you be okay? Would your mother be okay? Everything went fine, but it wasn't any easier the second time. I don't imagine it'll ever be easy no matter how many fillies and colts your mother has. And being that you're my daughter, I have to say, I'm scared for your future. I don't know if you'll ever understand it. There's a special fear that comes with being a father that has a daughter. Just know that if I'm ever harsh with the colts that come around calling on you, it's just because I love you. And I might embarrass you sometimes or make you cry over rules. It doesn't mean I don't understand what you're going through. It's because I want to keep you safe. I'd never forgive myself if anything happened to you. This last fear, though, this one might seem sort of silly. With how much we love your brother, I was afraid I might not love any pony else that much ever again. I would lie awake at night trying to imagine loving my next foal that much, and I couldn't do it. All the way to your delivery day. What if I didn't give you all the love you deserved? But as soon as I saw you in your mother's arms, as soon as I walked into the room, as soon as I saw you sleeping there, I knew I was fretting for nothing. You're so beautiful. From your vibrant orange coat to those adorable white freckles, I love everything about you. And just now, when I was looking at you over the side of your crib, I was so mesmerized by you. I was so enthralled that I didn't even notice my hat was slipping until it was on top of you. I reached in to grab it, but you'd already gotten a hold of it and wouldn't let go. For such a little filly, you have a mighty strong grip. I saw you trying to put it on and I helped you. It's much too big for you now. The whole thing dropped all the way over your head and onto your shoulders. But you just laughed, and when I lifted the hat off, you were smiling at me. If you still like it when you're older, I'll have to get you your own. I know that you'll be all grown up when you read this, but I can't picture you ever being anything but my baby filly. And no matter how big you get, or how far away you travel, I will always be your father, and I will always love you.
When Applejack finished her letter, she hugged it close to her chest and nuzzled up next to it. It was as if she was hugging her father again. She closed her eyes and pictured him in her mind.
I'll always be your baby filly, Daddy,
she thought, a few tears slipping down her face as she closed her arms tighter around the letter. And she held on so long and was so lost in her memories of him that she didn't realize her father's hat had fallen off her head. When she opened her eyes and saw the hat resting on the floor, she smiled and gave a light laugh. Apple Bloom was uncertain of what to make of this. She hardly remembered her parents. Sometimes she was afraid that the only way she knew what her dad's face looked like was from pictures. She knew she'd seen him. She knew she'd hugged him. And she knew he'd loved her. But it was hard to remember it. After she opened the envelope, it took her a moment to unfold the letter.
Dear Apple Bloom, to have another daughter is such a blessing. I wasn't sure if we'd ever have another foal, but here you are now. We've all been waiting to meet you. Big Mac is excited to get to hold you. Your Granny Smith came into town right away to see you. I'll admit, Applejack's upset that she's going to have to share her room, but I know she's always wanted a little sister. Your mom's already putting bows in your mane. She hopes you're more like her, a little less muddy and messy and a little more soft and spruced up. She talks about you being her sweet little angel. I can only hope you'll bring a bit of order to all the chaos that goes on around here. Your brother and sister may seem a lot older than you, but they're still foals now. They spend the day running around the house, bothering the chickens, and getting into more kinds of trouble than you could believe. Another filly? I don't know if my back can take it, but I know my heart can. I hope your brother and sister haven't given you too much of a hard time over the years. Your mom was worried about you being born so much later. She thinks you three won't get along that well, but I'm not worried. I was born right after your Uncle Orange and I know what it's like. You'll get compared side by side your whole life. You end up with the same friends and teachers and you never really feel like you can be your own pony. Case in point, your brother got his cutie mark just a few days ago. And so now Applejack is getting worried that she might not get hers. She goes on about how she's the last one in her class without one, but you won't have to go through that kind of trouble. You're gonna get to grow up on your own. I want you to discover who you're meant to be without worrying about people likening you to your sister or brother or anybody else. I want you to be who you are because I know you're some pony special. From the moment I first held you, I knew that. You were born to be special.
Apple Bloom was not as composed as her siblings. After reading the letter, she dropped it to the floor and started to sob. Quickly, her brother and sister gathered around her and held her close. They were both crying as well. None of them needed to say anything. They all knew how they felt. They all missed their father and mother. In her rocking chair, Granny Smith was letting out a few tears of her own. She missed her daughter and her son-in-law. It had been one of the hardest times in her life to move back to a farm and care for young ones again. The crying, the fighting, the messes. She was a younger pony then, but not that young. Still, even with all the struggle, she would do it all over again in an instant. These three were worth it. Stepping down from her chair, Granny Smith slowly made her way over to AJ, Big Mac, and Apple Bloom. She sat down beside them. Thank you, Granny. Apple Bloom simply nodded.
You're welcome, little ones.
Granny Smith joined them in a hug, and the family was all together on Hearthwarming Eve that night. All 6 of them together, holding one another by the fire.